Hey guys, Tyler Ansman here with Tyler Ansman Performance. So today, what we're gonna talk about is what coaches and athletes tend to get wrong when we talk about high velocity throwing, okay? So I think first, really important thing just to kind of talk about, get out of the way is, and this is kind of the number one thing that people get wrong about this, is that pitching velocity is directly related to pitching success, all right? The higher the velocity is on almost every pitch, the lower the hitter's success is in kind of like pretty much every measurable category, okay? So if you throw harder, you're likely to be more successful in the mound. Obviously, I'm not saying it's the only quality that matters, but it is extremely relevant. We've got a ton more content on this channel, on the site, and on Instagram if you're curious to kind of dig deeper into that. That's got to get out of the way first, but I'm not gonna kind of belabor that point, okay? So, one of the biggest kind of things, one of the overarching things that people get wrong is thinking there's one perfect technical model, okay? So I think the important thing to remember is we have principles that we kind of build our technical model around, but that technical model needs to include bandwidths. And this works across sports. We talk about sprinting, throwing, jumping, whatever it is. There are kind of biomechanical and physiological truths that we are kind of bound by, but within those, we have some room for individual differences, right? I mean, if we look at Jacob deGrom versus Noah Syndergaard, right? Played on the same team at the same time, both threw 100, did it very different ways, right? Noah Syndergaard a lot more elastic, right? Noah Syndergaard was a lot more kind of muscle and force driven, right? Jacob deGrom, right? Kind of lag in the arm, super deep behind his body, big hip shoulder separation, big ranges. Noah Syndergaard, kind of smaller ranges of motion, big forces, that kind of stuff. And they didn't even look the same, right? So there are these bandwidths, but they both did things. Reason why there's some amount of hip shoulder separation, there's some amount of horizontal abduction and retraction, right? They're doing these things and kind of creating these stretches and these elastic rebounds and all of these things. Just the ranges they have to go through to kind of take slack out of the system and create these stretches are gonna be different, okay? So this is a couple examples, but thinking that there's one perfect technical model and trying to put everybody in this box, you're gonna end up getting bell curve results, right? So like kind of these people in the middle are gonna get okay results, you'll get some great results, and you'll get some people who you make worse, all right? And we don't want that. We wanna individualize this to some degree so we can make everybody better or as good as they can get, okay? So that's an important one. Second, rigid drill prescription, okay? So thinking that this one template is gonna work for everybody just isn't it, okay? Again, we have kind of these temporal landmarks, these positional landmarks, these rhythmic landmarks, all of these different pieces that we can kind of build through. So whether you're using a backwards or forward chaining model or whatever, you may have these kind of pieces that you're building around, but even within those pieces, they're going to need to get individualized, right? Is a Marshall or a pivot pick right for everybody? No. Is a 2-pound throw of any kind right for everybody? Like, absolutely not, right? So we need to individualize these pieces to make it work for each athlete. So let's not have rigid drill prescription, right? We want to allow these guys to kind of let their own kind of best movement patterns emerge, okay? Next, over cueing. Okay, so I think it's relevant when we're talking about kind of like a technical focused day where it's going to be relatively lower intensity, probably not a ton of throwing, a more patterning focused kind of session, that we may have a specific cue or kind of piece that we're really specifically kind of digging in and working on. And they may have this kind of cue in mind to do this thing. Beyond that, when we're trying to throw as hard as possible, if we have kind of a high velocity session or certainly in a game, we don't want to be distracting ourselves with cues. We want to be going out there and doing the thing at the highest level possible. Okay, we don't want any of this confusion when we get in there. It's going to take away from the output. All right? Incorrect over and under load prescription. Okay, so this is a pretty big one. So we've taken a deep dive into this topic before about what over and under load works for, kind of who it works for and all this stuff. So you should check that out if you haven't yet. But if we give, guys way too heavy a balls, kind of like I mentioned earlier, they're gonna get really pushy with that 2-pound ball. Or if we give people underload balls before they need them or before they're ready for them, we're either one, going to cause problems from a health standpoint, two, they're not gonna be ready to kind of like benefit from them. Or 3, we're not saving that ace up our sleeve so that when they have kind of like maximized where they currently are and we need these kind of more advanced methods and tools and that kind of stuff, we are not going to be able to kind of get this kind of really strong stress response from them because they will have used this in the past, right? So it's not gonna be as potent as it otherwise would be, all right? All right, so a reluctance to throw at high velocity is also a big one. This is kind of the same thing with coaches who won't sprint guys at full intensity, all these, you're trying to keep them healthy. But not only is this a performance thing, right? It's also a health thing, okay? Because if you don't throw hard at all, and then you get into a game when you're gonna need to throw hard, all of a sudden kind of the demands go way up, we're spiking that workload, we're causing all these problems because the body is not prepared for this. So it's not just a performance-based necessity, it's a health-based necessity as well because we wanna be vaccinated against these demands that we're gonna encounter in the game, okay? All right, so too frequent of high velocity outputs. If you're asking guys to pitch, right, 3 times a week and things like that, what's happening is we're essentially fatiguing, right, especially the kind of the tissues that protect some of these passive restraints. We're fatiguing the muscles kind of around these, right? So if we think about the flexor pronator mass, for example, right, we know it's gonna take some of the load off of the UCL, right, the passive restraint. And if it's fatigued, it can't do that job as well or at as high of a level. So there is likely to be more load going through the UCL. And we do know from cadaveric models, the load that's going through the elbow, all right, at kind of this highest point is higher than what the UCL can actually handle on its own, right? So we need these kind of active restraints around it to take some of that load off. And if they can't dissipate some of that and kind of take some of that themselves, then we're gonna get more going through that, more likely to get an injury, those kinds of things. So we wanna think about how frequently are we asking guys to come out, because we do know that between outings, it may take anywhere from 24 to 72 hours to kind of fully bounce back based on kind of the strength metrics and all these things that we're kind of measuring for these guys, right? And so if we're asking them to come back on a shorter kind of recovery track than that, we're likely to be causing some problems. So the other piece can be if you're having guys, you know, do pull downs multiple times a week in season, not something that we see as much, but the frequency of how often they're being asked to pitch is a big one for sure. Okay. Lack of specificity closer to the season. So essentially, we know that velocity, right, is a quality that needs to be improved for X athlete, okay? And we go after that, but we push it too long leading right up to the season. We never specifically adapt for them being able to pitch on the mound competitively against hitters, right? We just push it too close to the season, and then we get there and they're not actually ready to pitch. They throw much harder, but they can't specifically execute in game how they want from a command or stuff perspective. So that could be an issue too, is just kind of pushing that too far and never getting that specific exposure. We're kind of transmutating the qualities that we've trained during the off season. Training like it's the off season, in season. This kind of goes with the previous point, but essentially, rather than kind of being mindful that we want to minimize the amount of fatigue we have going into an outing, you're still training like it's the off season, kind of pushing for kind of building these qualities rather than pushing for competitive success in that outing and kind of maximizing your readiness on a weekly or however frequently basis. All right. Final piece, no high velocity in season. This is a more challenging one for some guys and is not going to be as relevant, right, if you're the Friday starter or the Saturday starter or the midweek guy or whatever, or the closer, right? You're going to get enough exposure throughout a given week that it's not going to be a problem. But for the guys who maybe aren't getting very frequent outings but haven't been redshirted or whatever yet, they may need to touch that high velocity quality on their own outside of kind of game scenarios. Kind of same with a position player who maybe isn't getting to play, that kind of stuff. The practices aren't as demanding, you know, maybe you've got frequent games. They may need a specific time to be able to do that, right? So like if you're a position player, taking a few throws in a given practice, if you know you're not gonna get a ton of time, where you really let it eat from your position when you guys do IO or whatever it is, or at the end of long toss, kind of getting ready for practice, if you know you're only gonna do BP, right? As a pitcher, when you're not getting a ton of innings, having this bullpen, right, where you can like let at least the first 5 to 15 really go to make sure we're touching that stimulus, right? Every, 1 to 2 times a week is kind of how often we need to keep that from diminishing, all right? So, because the high velocity qualities are going to dissipate really quickly because they're highly neurological, all right? So these are just a couple of things that coaches and athletes get wrong when it comes to high velocity throwing, but I think it's worth kind of having this discussion a little more. So if you got questions, comments, whatever, feel free to drop them below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.